Nothing to worry.
Ehssan, so good to see you. Thanks so much for joining me today. I'm speaking to Ehssan Sakhaee today. He's a lecturer at Sydney University in the engineering department and also the founder of Wacky Wisdom. And Ehssan and I are going to talk about personal development and particular focus on mindfulness and meditation. Very much a subject I love to talk about and hear about. So Ehssan, welcome. So good to see you.
Thank you so much, Gabby, for having me.
Welcome. So, Ehssan, just let us know what got you into mindfulness and, yeah, how you got started on that journey of which, because as we all know, once we do get on the journey of meditation and mindfulness, it's just ongoing, evolving. You never actually get anywhere. You just kind of always changing and moving with it. So, yeah, just explain a little bit about how you got started.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much, Gabby, for having me at your show. And so for me, I think personal development has always been a part of my life since I was a kid. Since I was in my teens, always wanted to kind of develop myself, and so I studied different spiritual traditions, personal development paradigms and theories, and so on. But essentially, I think it was my personal journey of finding out how do I lead myself more effectively and become the best version of myself. And that kind of became the cornerstone of certain experiences I had. I can tell you like one. I spent several years in Japan. And I found that quite a challenging experience because, being self-isolated in a country, you don't know the language properly. And I had to kind of learn how to get through all those times where I felt disconnected and not able to communicate effectively. And mindfulness was a tool that helped me to meditate and ground myself and get in touch with myself and reconnect with myself, really, essentially. And through those difficult times. And also, coming from an engineer, so I did engineering and I did all these technical kind of degrees, and then my job was all technical. And going through the education system, going into and working at the university, I realized, there's so many things that so many of the students around me lacked a lot of these skills of self-management, self-regulation, and just these things, what we call soft skills. And so it was around that time, which was about 11 years ago, where I felt there's a calling, me being the person, to help them cultivate those skills. So then that was the time where I brought that, what I had learned and what had helped me, into the education system where I was in Japan at that moment. So I started kind of these mentoring programs, coaching programs around soft skill development, meditation, things like that. And there was one point where I realized this is all I want to do. So I had to quit my main job, which was doing researching wireless telecommunications, and pretty much focusing all my work on that personal development and leadership development space about 10 years ago, which meant I had to also leave my job because I wasn't hired to do that kind of stuff. It was okay to do it on the side, but I still had to churn out papers, research papers on engineering. So I had to kind of let go of that and come back to Australia and see where else I can apply that. Which was, I found my way into Sydney University, where I could actually embed some of these personal development and mindfulness into my own teaching
And that's
in what I do.
fantastic that they accepted this as part of, so it's part of the actual engineering degree to do your course, or is it um,
It's currently the subject I teach is a substitute for another subject. So if they do this, they don't have to do that. So it's kind of it becomes part of a core unit. But it's very much like looking for opportunities where whether it's an elective or whether it's a core subject, is like how do you embed some of these things. And I just looked for all the subjects that are related to either leadership or sustainability or entrepreneurship, where it makes sense to embed that in there, right? So um, so that was a venue for me to look for, I changed things a lot. Like, for instance, the leadership subjects that were taught were very much around leadership theories. It was very much not about personal transformation, but about just learning about different theories. And, whereas for me, I kind of changed the program so that the first part of the program, it's all about self-leadership, self-awareness, self-management, all of that, which then again, mindfulness was a core component of that.
And
So it was just finding, yeah.
no, and I just find that it's so interesting that when you, and those things are imperative in all industries and jobs, and to have that awareness and comprehension of what it is to just be a person and to meet other people as well. And you take away that layer of kind of competition when you learn these skills and understand, yeah, what it is to lead people and to have humanity as part of a business. It just, you'd imagine it'd be standard, but unfortunately in our world it's like it's like a revelation for me to hear that you actually do that in an engineering course. But it'd be great to see it as a standard, right?
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It's just not there as standard, and just to break that cycle, um and also be challenged by others is like, why, even students, it's a lot of students actually find this the most valuable aspect of what they learn. And there are others who say, well, why do we need to learn this? I mean, we're here to do engineering, just learn technical stuff. Because they can't see the application of it in a broader context outside what they're used to, which is compete technically against other students. And just, and most of my students are very bright students who excelled in high school, and they're kind of really intelligent. They've got high ATARs and grades, so they kind of come into university thinking that's what matters, just competing and being the best. And so, I mean, I can relate to them because I was like that. So it's not like, so I was like that for until, I was an undergrad, where I started kind of thinking, is that what really matters actually?
Mm.
And I started questioning that whole mindset of achievement, which I can relate to. All my students have very achievement oriented mindset, but also many of them are miserable at the same time. So achievement does not bring happiness. So that was a point where it's like, hang on. Um, and even when I was working in Japan, I looked at a lot of the academics who were very successful, but they also were very miserable. And I was like, okay, something's not right here. so, so it was kind of that turning point where I started questioning what's really important, and looking for the answer. Um, and and that was when um, I kind of brought in what I had already learned myself, over the years, that helped me to become happier and, a better version of myself. Obviously, I was still learning. I hadn't got everything right, but it was like, oh, okay, these things, what I've learned, would be helpful. I didn't learn it in academia. I learned it outside academia, outside the education system. But this is what's needed in the education system. So as an educator and part of the education system, I saw it as a responsibility for me to bring that in, um, and look like the odd one out from amongst my colleagues, because there's like, that's kind of not what we normally do. Right?
And do they
So,
accept it? Is it an acceptable part of, obviously you've been doing it a while now, is it accepted, or do some people still go, what's all that about? Or has
oh,
it,
absolutely.
yeah.
I think what we started doing in engineering, close to 8 years ago, started kind of, that conversation we started, 8 years ago, having these kind of leadership programs, that was I involved in it, kind of got into the wider university. And now we have graduate qualities which look at leadership skills and soft skills and things like that. So it's all, um, it does, people do see the value, but someone has to start something somewhere before it, and have some kind of pilot program where people can see that yes, there is value, and there's students are finding value in that.
I think it's
Before,
interesting that it's kind of, not that it isn't leadership and not that leadership's not important, but it's under that banner of leadership. It reminds me of Brene Brown and talking about shame and vulnerability, and how companies would come to her, corporations, to say, yeah, but can you call it creativity and innovation? Like, yeah, it's a little
right.
banner over the blanket a little bit. Like if you called it meditation, come to my meditation class, you probably wouldn't get as many people show up. But
That's right. That's right.
yeah,
That's right. So the banner kind of helps at least bring people in, and then they get exposed to other things which are
and it's too
they wouldn't
late.
have
You've got them.
been exposed.
And so,
Yeah.
Ehssan, from that experience, you founded Wacky Wisdom. Is that right? Do you want to tell us a bit about Wacky Wisdom? And even
Wacky
the
Wisdom.
name is I mean, it's a catchy name right there.
So the Wacky Wisdom actually, so when I came back from Japan, I actually had nothing to go into, right? I had no job, and I thought about, okay, what do I want to really do with my life? As a cartoonist, which was something which I had completely overlooked. So I thought, okay, how do I bring my cartooning skills and what I'm passionate about, which is personal development, through whether it's mindfulness, well-being, and so I thought, okay, Wacky Wisdom is making something where you make uh, seemingly difficult, complex problems into something more palatable and fun and funny. So it was kind of that space where we can create edutainment out of all these kind of very important topics that no one really looked at, which includes that wisdom and self-leadership and mindfulness and all of those things. And that was basically what started it. So that was even before I joined the university. And at that time, I started creating animations around well-being, and but again, I didn't have a business model really at that time. So a lot of my early clients were startups who wanted to explain what their business was about. So they would come to me, and I helped them build animations to explain their businesses. So I kind of diverted a bit from there, from my
Okay.
original plan. But yeah, so that was and right now, so Wacky Wisdom is still a avenue where I can create animations based around important messages that I'd like to send out to the world. Is how do I make it fun and interesting, but also important? So educating while entertaining. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that I use that in my teaching as well. A lot of cartoons, animations to get complex complex ideas across to my students, and they find that
And
quite yeah
make it fun
valid.
and
Yeah,
palatable
exactly.
and
Not
yeah.
palatable.
Yeah. And so, yeah, what can students expect when they come to your classes? What do you teach? And do you teach a certain kind of meditation techniques, or do you use many different, um, yeah,
So
types of meditation or mindfulness? Do you stick to mindfulness? Do you stick to traditional teachings, or, yeah?
so there's two aspects of so there's the basically the first part of the course is around leading and sustaining self, and so that self-awareness and self-understanding and self-management is that core component. And under that banner we have different techniques. So mindfulness is one technique of observing yourself, being aware of what's happening in your mind, in your body, around you, and developing that heightened sense of awareness. Um, and I obviously talk about self-regulation, which is like deep breathing and doing certain techniques to kind of, if you're feeling stressed, you can exercise or do deep breathing, and do laughter therapy. So I do cover different kinds of things. But I do say that mindfulness is not about change. It's about just simply awareness and acceptance of your current experience. Don't think, it's a separate kind of, it's almost its own thing happening, where you just simply observe your internal experiences and just fully accept them for what they are, non-judgmentally. And just talking about it obviously is not enough, because they need to practice it. So we have weekly mindfulness classes. Twice a week I run that through Zoom at the moment. So they join those classes and spend 10-15 minutes just paying attention to the breath, doing a body scan, and that kind of helps them cultivate and develop that skill of awareness. So it's guided, on how to observe non-judgmentally and accepting whatever experience you're having, even if you're not able to focus and be present. That's okay, because that's the whole point of the practice. A lot of them come into the meditation thinking it's about clearing your mind and not having any thoughts, and that's absolutely not the case. It's like, if there are lots of thoughts, just observe them, accept them, just and just gently bring your attention back. And so kind of getting that message across is really important with the mindfulness practice. And it is essentially the basis of the course in a way, because it's almost like you develop a heightened sense of awareness of self, others, the planet, and that's when you can actually lead and manage, not before. If you don't have a deep understanding of yourself and of others and of the planet, and what are the root causes of problems, how can you lead, right? So it's just really starting with that awareness aspect and really cultivating that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, awareness, that's, I think that's just spot on for when I used to teach mindfulness in corporate, and I would only teach practice, and I'd give a little bit of concept and theory, but like you say, you only know what it is from practice. No words can really describe or explain it, because it's going to be different for everybody as well. But I used to describe it as that dimension inside of you that's always still, always aware, and you're just building a path to that dimension. And when you reach that, because I know when people first sit to practice mindfulness, and like you say, they think they're not going to think any thoughts, you do get to those places sometimes, but it is about realizing there's like another dimension to you that is aware and observing and always just in the moment, and it's just finding that part of you and then operating from that part. Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
the kind of way I explain it. And when you get it, you just get it, and you're going to get there through practice, through sitting, through doing the body scan and breathing, whatever technique takes you there. Different things will work for different people. And what a valuable tool to always have throughout your life and to learn through the education department. I hope we see it in schools more and more. I know there's more mindfulness teaching in schools, but hopefully one day that will just be a standard option. Like if you want to go to religious studies, like in primary school, we have a religious once a week. Instead of that, you just go to a mindfulness class, like having that as a standard choice for kids, or even just incorporating it into, starting the day with 5 minutes of kids breathing and being present with themselves. What a different generation we'll have in the future. Just imperative mental health and personal development. And Ehssan, I just, one thing that I've always wondered about, and I spoke to you about this before we recorded, is just that the male aspect of personal development and meditation and these kind of more, I guess, spiritual practices. And I've been in, personal development courses and classes for many, many years. And yeah, men aren't always there. Well, tell us about that. Where are they? and like, what is that? It's just unfortunate that there's that space of not wanting to be a part of it, or is it intimidating, or opening up to your feelings? What would you say it is about men and mental health and personal development?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, Gabby. And I think that there are probably different aspects that contribute to that. One is probably culture. Culturally, um, men, and I think in Australia it's the same, are not supposed to be vulnerable or weak or have problems or have emotions, and just need to be strong. And they, I think it's a cultural thing to hide emotions and not deal with them, and just make yourself busy with sports and work and all of that, in a kind of a cultural sense. So that's one, I think, one element. um and kind of it feeds to the next thing, is like, if no one else is doing it, so why should I do it, right? So it's like, there's always a tipping point that's required, where you have a certain number of people who are interested for the rest to follow. It's kind of, it's the same as, in um uh, if you look at like new ideas, right? There's, and it's funny. I'll tell you this story where I look at, like, because I spent some time in the US, and I observed how students in the US, for instance, 80% turn up to lectures, right? 80% turn up to lectures in the US, whereas here 80% don't turn up to lectures. And I was like, why is it completely inverse? And I realized, yes, because 80% of people look at what other what the majority are doing, and they just follow that rather than think for themselves. It's an unfortunate thing, but so going back to, it's like, if most men are not doing that, then the rest will just say, oh, why should I do it? Because it's like me going to a yoga class. I used to go, when I go to yoga class, it's like I'm either the only guy or maybe there's one more, and we're the odd ones out, right?
Yes.
Um
And how
and
does
to
that make you feel? Actually, just on that, how does that make you feel? Is it awkward? Do you think that's maybe an element of it? Because if men do choose to go to yoga classes or meditation class, is it do they feel not manly enough if they're there and there's 10 women there and they feel a bit out of their depth or overpowered, overwhelmed?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
all the above. I think
right.
all the above, and to be comfortable with um with that requires uh, the kind of letting go of an identity. Essentially, it's just, or what the society thinks that you should be like, rather than what you want to be like, right?
Mm.
um and not many people are willing to do that, because they want to fit in. They want to fit into their groups, and they want to fit in, and be seen in a certain way. So it is an identity thing, right? It's a cultural, but also identity, where, how do I look if I go into a class where everyone's a woman? Do I, like, what would people think, right? So that comes up, I think, for most people. So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So it's kind of, um it's funny, because I sense that a lot of people want to be different, but they don't, because it's because of how they might be perceived, right? And that kind of judgment is preventing that from happening, to the point where I say, if people didn't worry about, then probably 50% of the people coming into a yoga class will be male,
Yeah,
right?
and obviously then is it, it's not manly enough to go to these classes, so but it's manly enough to go to the pub and drink a beer, and that's how you deal with your mental health and your emotions. But then obviously we've got a really big issue with suicide in the male population.
Mm.
When I worked for a government department in mental health, I did suicide prevention training, and the statistics of men is way more than women in all age groups, and I was really surprised at that. I think at the moment it's one of the biggest. Suicide's one of the biggest problems for men under the age of 44 in this country, and so we do need to look as a community how we can address these issues of not making it okay to talk about your mental health and go to a meditation class or seek some kind of personal development. Like how can we make it okay so men don't feel
Yeah.
feel so that they can't, and the only way out is suicide, which just seems to be, from the statistics, is what's
Mm,
happening.
mm,
Yeah.
mm. Absolutely. I think it is about self-worth as well. Like, if someone feels like they don't fit into this kind of a image of what a man should be like strong, not have emotions, and if they find themselves not fitting into that image, what is the outlet? People kind of, if their identity, they're having almost like an identity crisis. Again, it's all about identity. It's about expectations rather than like, and that's one of the main issues is people, and probably men, experience this, but I think women also. It's a question of self-worth and self-value and how you feel about that, and people tie that their self-worth to, from an external perspective, what other people think of them, and when that's compromised, that's when people start kind of doing irrational, going the irrational path of self-destruction, really.
Mm. And it is that environmental, if you feel judged by your environment, if your family or friends aren't supportive of this idea, then it'd be very difficult to, it's like courage. It comes back to
Yeah.
having the courage to be vulnerable, to seek these kind of things out, seek the help out, and make that change, because then you really have to stand up to people that you love or the people that are around you that you are conditioned by, and say something that's not okay with them. And
Yeah,
that is, I think we all probably struggle with that. It is very difficult. And
absolutely.
and if
Absolutely.
you come from a background that really just does not have that in their scope of awareness, it's very, very difficult. So only as a society can we really bring everybody up and make it okay. So Ehssan, on that, do you have any advice for anyone that may be listening that is wanting to, is a man and wants to explore personal development? Got any tips or ideas on where you'd start or what could help?
I think, first of all, is going after what you want to be and being who you want to be. I think that's one element of it. Is if that's what you're interested in, just go after it, and don't do it because other people are doing it or not doing it. It's just, I think people just follow a trend without really thinking what's important and valuable to them. So so it's really just questioning what is actually important to me. Is going to the pub on a Friday more important than doing a yoga? Just really being honest about that answer. Um, and what are the repercussions? Yes, I want to fit in, but what are the costs of that, right? And yes, there are certain sacrifices, and people might start to do things which make, and I always say, yes, when you do become who you are, you may lose relationships, you may lose certain people who were not meant to be in your life because they're not supportive of who you are. But then you will attract people who are supportive of that new person who is your true self, right? So I think that's really important, to be comfortable with the fact that there will be lifestyle changes, when you, make a choice, a conscious choice about what's important. Um, so
That's
that's one thing.
great.
And
Yeah, go.
yeah,
Sorry. Yeah, go.
um, and so I think that's really important, is to ask oneself that hard question. I think the second thing is going back to what I mentioned about self-worth, is about that intrinsic value that everyone has, regardless of what you do, where you are, who you are. Um, it's independent of social status, it's independent of wealth, it's independent of your ethnicity, your gender, your religion, whatever, right? And really, identifying that intrinsic value that is in all of life, and all of, not just humans, but all of life, and everything that there is. And that you don't have to be somebody to prove your worth. You don't have to kind of get there, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. A lot of people are trying to accumulate more degrees and status and this and that, just to prove their sense of worth. Yeah.
Yeah, so
um,
true. And you must see that a lot as well, being
oh,
in
absolutely,
university. Yeah,
absolutely.
that's a really good
And,
point.
people, like, I've had students come to me and say, just, I can sense that. And I say, look, even if you sit and do nothing for the rest of your life, you're valuable. You're doing too many things. Stop it. Right. Because they want to do so much to look good. And I ask them, okay, if you find it valuable, yes, do it, but also do it for the right reason, and not because you want to kind of elevate yourself, not because you're trying to compete or stand out from the crowd or whatever that is, because it's just never going to end, and it will never bring you satisfaction. To do it because you find it valuable, because you this is your passion, and you find meaning in it, not to prove your worth, because you're already worthy, no matter what you do, no matter where you end up, no matter what. I think you're nailing that into our youth is so important, because I think a lot of the depression, the anxiety, suicide is actually rooted in identity and self-worth. I think that is the root of it, is like, am I valuable enough? Am I loved? Am I enough?
Yeah.
Essentially, that is, even if it's not spoken out loud, it's so unconsciously deeply ingrained that is it's the kind of the basis of a lot of the things people do, um, to kind of to make themselves valuable, and the problem with that is is because then it just never ends. It's an infinite game, essentially, because every time you raise yourself, someone else has to raise themselves to feel as worthy. And so there's just it's a dysfunctional mindset, because it will just lead to disaster. Whereas once you kind of accept that everyone's valuable, I'm no more valuable than the homeless person sitting there, regardless of what status and wealth and where I am, whether I'm the prime minister or just a beggar, my value is not going to change. Then suddenly the conversation changes. It's like, okay, what am I about what am I passionate about, what's important to me, how can I contribute, how can I make a difference, what is my work in this life? So the focus just it's taken away from these extrinsic factors of uh, perception of value, to the intrinsic motivation of why, what is valuable, what is my contribution. um, it's a very different mindset, and
It
that's where
is
we need to be.
definitely, and that's great advice. And I just think that's so spot on about value and how people don't feel valuable, or just measuring your value on your pay packet or your education, and that will never end. Like you said, it will just keep going,
Mm.
because there's always more money you can make, or there's always more certificates that you can get, or more knowledge you can accumulate, and not realizing the value is that you're here, you're alive, you were born to parents, you have family, friends. Even if you're feeling isolated, your value is that you're even part of this, what we call humanity. You're here experiencing, you are projecting that awareness into this environment, and that's the value that we all have and share. And yeah, being homeless on the street, there's a lot of value in other people wanting to help. Like, so
Yeah.
without people there to help, then there's no helpers. And when you really get into that, like why you want to help people is because you gain something out of it too.
Mm.
It's
Mm.
not all altruistic, it's actually beneficial. It fills you up, giving and sharing and giving to people that can't give or don't have enough to give to themselves even. So Ehssan, that was so, I really appreciated that. And thanks so much for joining me. And I just want to know what's next for you, what's coming up. You mentioned you had a podcast earlier. How's that
Yeah.
going? And yeah,
Yeah, so I've started. I mean, I will also be on a new journey after June, because I'll be leaving the university. So there'll be a
okay,
new chapter opening up for
yeah.
me.
What's
Um,
happening?
so there's a number of books I'm writing, so I want to kind of complete that. I've got a non-for-profit called Street Poet, which actually was when we originally started about 3 years ago, was to eradicate homelessness through self-expression and arts and poetry. And so that's something is I've parked, because I've been so involved with the university and teaching. And so that's one. That's the other. And I've got and I mentioned to you, I've got so many different projects happening. I've got another startup which is about measuring soft skills, which is something we don't measure. So that's another thing. So there's a fair bit of work, but for me to step away after almost 10 years of teaching at Sydney University, and seeing what else that I can do, and hopefully reach out to more people. And I think that's one of my passions, is to reach out to more people and make a difference, not just individually but collectively. I think working with others is so essential in this kind of work that we're doing around well-being and transformation, personal transformation. So that's kind of where I'll be from July, and yeah, there's a bit of uncertainty. So there is I feel like the same thing that I did 10 years ago, leaving Japan, just entering the unknown, is happening again in 5 months time. So we'll see.
Yeah, and look, and it's courageous. It's definitely risk taking, and I've been there too. And I totally. But this sounds like you've been very successful in the last 10 years, and I'm sure there'll only be more success ahead for you. And definitely come back and tell me more about Street Poet and your homelessness and your studies on soft skills. I'd love to hear all of it. Ehssan,
Thank
thanks so
you.
much. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. Bye.
Thank you.